Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and this time we're going to be talking about Batman Year 2, which is a 4-issue miniseries by Mike Barr, with issues 2, 3, and 4 being drawn by Todd McFarlane. I can't actually remember who did the first issue, but there's actually a couple people there, and it's a pretty quick artist shift over with the second issue. So essentially, the best way to introduce this is back when Miller and Mazzucchelli did Batman Year 1, it was really, really popular. Everyone loved it. DC decided they were going to make a Year 1 story for every character. Nightwing Year 1, Batgirl Year 1, Robin Year 1, Black Lightning Year 1. There was just a lot of Year 1s going around, a lot of people throwing around that title. And Batman actually got to have more than just a Year 1 story. He got to have a Year 2 story and a Year 3 story. And both of those stories later would be replaced in continuity by Jeff Loeb's Batman The Long Halloween and Batman Dark Victory. And both of those stories actually encompass a time period of a whole year, as opposed to these two that are actually just what a lot of people consider to be just the opening couple of days of the second and third year of Batman. The same way Batman Year 1 worked, where you had a story that would occur in no more than a small period of time. Batman shows up in the beginning of the book around, I can't remember at this point, I think maybe it's February, January, something like that. And the book spans a few months, but there's a lot of stories that happen in between it, and doesn't end the same month that it begins. So there's lots of stories that can happen afterwards until you get to Year 2. And then Year 2 is kind of the same way, where the opening, where the whole story takes place in the span of a few weeks. Same with Year 3. And there's a whole bunch of stories that happen afterwards that make up the entire canon version of Year 2 and Year 3 of Batman. And The Long Halloween and Dark Victory don't do that. They just tell one story that takes a full year to tell in the form of 13 issues. So Year 2 is an interesting piece. The best way I think I can describe this is that it's more of an Elseworlds or a thought experiment than it is an actually fully formed story. I think Mike Barr was more fascinated by the idea of what he was doing, that all he really did was put an outline on paper and didn't actually write a story. And that sounds kind of harsh, but I think what it is this needed a second draft. Hell, this needed maybe 2 more drafts, because the initial premise isn't that bad. Essentially what we have here is, in the opening of Batman's second year, Captain Gordon is now made Commissioner Gordon, and as Commissioner Gordon, he's doing interviews and stuff, and talking about the Batman, and asserting that Batman is a free agent, not a force of the police. And there's introduced this idea that 20 years before the Batman, there used to be another vigilante that roamed Gotham, called the Reaper. Later in canon, we'll find out that the new version of Gotham's history is that before Batman, Alan Scott Green Lantern used to protect Gotham City. So the Reaper has been gone for 20 years, and Batman shows up, and there's a couple of people comparing the two, and at the same time, the Reaper actually comes back. And a lot of it's because he wants to see how much the city's changed, and he realized it hasn't very much at all. And the big idea is that the Reaper actually cleaned up all of the streets and then just left. And part of the reason they're as terrible as they are now, and why crime is so rampant, is because the Reaper left unexpectedly, and he didn't leave enough of an impact. He spouts this mantra of fear the Reaper, and the idea is that he used fear and intimidation to rule, but his killing of criminals is ultimately why the social change didn't stick. This is an idea that's explored just as well in the miniseries Deadshot Bulletproof, where Deadshot is basically the same way that functions the same way the Reaper does. And you find out that people keep wanting to test your limits no matter how much you make the neighborhood a better place, and so you never really make it safe more than for an instant. And so Batman meets up with the Reaper after the Reaper is going around killing people, and Batman gets his ass kicked pretty hard, and when he returns to Wayne Manor nearly dead, he goes to the fireplace underneath his parents' photograph, and he pulls out the gun that was used to kill him by Joe Chill. And he says now the Batman carries a gun. And so after that, the entire story is basically Batman going around trying to find the Reaper and working with Joe Chill, who actually in this continuity, we know Joe Chill killed Batman's parents, and he's working with Batman to help take out the Reaper, and basically save the mob from that wrath. So the story's premise isn't that bad. The initial idea of Batman deciding to adopt a gun just to be more effective and not necessarily to kill isn't a bad idea. There are a lot of people, a lot of Batman purists that will say Batman should never carry a gun, Batman never ought to carry a gun, and I agree with that, but I'm not 100% against telling a story where Batman uses a gun and then decides it's not for him. I'm not against that idea whatsoever. I'm okay with a Batman spending a few months with a gun and then realizing this is not the way to do things. Particularly when Robin comes into the mix, and we can talk about that a little bit more when we get to year 3. So that doesn't bother me. What bothers me about this story is Batman gets his ass kicked and he decides just to adopt a gun. And the whole span of the first year of Batman, he gets his ass kicked a lot. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to me. I don't really buy that after one beating, Batman would suddenly decide that he's going to change his whole modus operandi and get a gun. And then add on top of that he's working with Joe Chill. I don't see why this version of Batman is making these decisions. I get that he's younger and he's a little wet behind the ears, but he's just sort of doing things because that's what the premise of the book is, and he's just moving along the notes of the plot, and we aren't really getting a sense of who he is as a person and why he's making these choices. We get all these scenes where Bruce is talking to Leslie Tompkins, and Leslie Tompkins is against Bruce Wayne fighting crime in the first place, and every scene that they're in together, she's standing on this moral high ground. And it sucks that you almost agree with her and then you don't, because she keeps reprimanding Bruce for using a gun, which she ought to, but then she just reprimands him for being a vigilante in the first place. She reprimands him for doing anything, and that's kind of the crux of the problem with that character. But she's in that, and she's really irritating in that capacity. And the big thing that she says that's actually of value to the story is that she says Bruce is consumed by the cave, and Alfred corrects her and says that the cave is where Bruce feels the most home. And in the cave, he's there working on his marksmanship with the gun. And his whole obsession right now, his whole life right now, is trying to figure out who Batman is. Because he's created Batman after year 1. He's created an identity, he knows what his mission is. But he hasn't developed a persona. He's gotten a mantle. He's gotten the means and the direction. But on a psychological and personal level, what is Batman to him outside of just a rechanneling of his frustration? And that's sort of what the book's dealing with. And you parallel some of that with a girl who's actually the daughter of the Reaper. Her name is Rachel. And Rachel Dawes may or may not have been based on this character. Christopher Nolan mentions that he read a lot of early Batman stories like Long Halloween and Year 2 to write his films. But whether or not Rachel is a reference to this Rachel, I can't really say. So he meets a girl named Rachel, and Rachel's actually about to become a nun, and she says she's fixated on learning about the root of evil in a person's soul. Bruce and her actually start dating, and she decides she's not going to be a nun anymore, and Bruce decides to get engaged to her. And they have a pretty long, steady relationship until the Reaper dies after the end of this book, and then she decides she has to leave. And the interesting idea here is that she's sort of on the same quest as Batman is, on the same quest as Bruce is, where Bruce is trying to figure out what this personality that he adopts when the Batman costume is. At the same time, this girl is trying to figure out what drives evil in the first place. Problem here is that they don't actually focus on that very much. There's a lot of lip service to that idea, but nothing interesting that's really done with it. And the most fun you really have in the story is watching Batman and the Reaper combat each other and talk about the Reaper's need to kill and Batman's not. Although here it's not even really made that clear why Batman doesn't kill when he has the gun, or the argument that a gun's too dangerous. Because by the end of the book he says a gun could kill a person, but so could he if he just punches them the right way. So there's not really a definitive point Batman's making by the end of the story. And so when he decides not to use the gun, when the Reaper dies, when Rachel decides to leave him, all that stuff is supposed to create this strong emotional head for why Batman is the way he is, and it just doesn't condense that way. It all just feels like a bunch of random plot threads that don't tie themselves together very well. This book was also the basis of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and Mask of the Phantasm uses a lot of these elements and gets it right. Everything you saw in Mask of the Phantasm that worked, where Bruce's relationship with... blanking on her name. When Bruce's relationship with the girl that became the Reaper in that series, or the Phantasm in that series, is what they'd call it. Andrea, I think was her name. Andrea. Everything they do there, and the whole focus behind her leaving, and the things Batman would have to become in order to be efficient, all the stuff that's handled in that film is here, except it doesn't make as much sense. So this just isn't a great book. Batman has a moment where he reveals who he is to Joe Chill, and there's a conversation. It's very much like the scene in Chill of the Night in the Brave and the Bold episode, where Batman is confronting the man who killed his parents. Not a lot of emotional weight to that. Not a lot of that works. Batman is thinking about killing him, but then the Reaper does it for him, and so Batman never really escapes being a killer in this story, and that's kind of my biggest problem with it. Is Batman goes everywhere with the intent to kill, and it just so happens that he doesn't. Then he decides he doesn't want to use a gun anymore, and they never really give you a strong character arc outside of that. Add on top of that the love story that Bruce has here just moves too quickly. The idea that Bruce is a good replacement for the Reaper, that the Reaper tells him at the end of the story, doesn't really come from any place, and Bruce's the kind of ironic sense that that's meant and doesn't come across very well. So this just isn't a great story. There's lots of good ideas here. The idea that Batman using a gun helps Bruce become happy in his personal life is something that could be developed and used really well, and a lot of that was when we did Mask of the Phantasm. So this just isn't that great. Again, it just feels kind of like an outline. There's nothing like awful about this story. It just feels like it's completely boneless, or it's completely meatless. It's just like a bone dry outline of a really interesting premise. It doesn't go anywhere. So I can't really recommend it. It's not in print. I also don't think that you can find any sort of retro collection of these Batman stories. I don't think they're printing them in any of the Showcase Presents or any of that. There was a trade that was out of print. The individual issues you can find, and it's a 90s comic, so they should be pretty abundant. I don't think you can get it digitally either. So unless you want to track down the issues, that's really the only way to read it right now. But it's not a great story. I don't really recommend it, but I think it's a curious experiment, and if the premise sounds interesting enough to you, I think that's all. I think you don't really need to sit down and read the book outside of acknowledging that the premise sounds interesting. That's really all this book is there for. So thanks everybody for listening. Let me know what you think, whether you agree or disagree, and I'll see you next time.